Sullivan said that until the end of his term, Biden will discuss with politicians the need to support Ukraine in the wake of Trump's election victory. This is about his conversation with American politicians. But haven't we received this support before? We've been receiving aid according to approved plans, and Trump doesn't look like he's serious about changing anything, at least not yet, because no one has spoken openly about it. I believe Trump doesn't yet know how to handle the Ukraine issue. His priority is the U.S., followed by China, Europe, and Israel, with Ukraine still far down the list. Therefore, the current administration's task before January 20th is to ensure that its successors understand the importance of maintaining support for Ukraine.
Чинної адміністрації, яка буде чинною до 20 січня наступного року, є пояснення своїм наступникам, людям, які будуть
I have a feeling that not everyone in Trump's team understands the situation and what is really going on. I have this feeling in particular because of my meetings in the Arab media space where I recently spoke with American professors, and I got the impression that they do not have a clear expertise of the situation in Ukraine.
Там останнім часом якраз перетинався з американськими професорами, які, скажімо так, коли я з ними спілкувався в цих...
And this is what Sullivan and other officials in the Biden administration are saying. They want to pass on this knowledge and this information to better understand the situation, not what it may seem, but the real state of affairs. And it is these statements that explain their position.
Кращого розуміння ситуації, що відбувається. Тобто не те, що там здається, а те, що реально є, стан справ. І цим і пояснюються ці заяви, тому оскільки...
Therefore, since, once again, the position on Ukraine has not yet been formed and is currently being discussed in the Trump administration, these dialogues will continue to be held to better formulate it and provide more information. At least, we can watch this happen in real time, roughly speaking. But Kremlin spokesman PESKOV said that Moscow saw positive signals in connection with the election of Donald Trump as president. However, these positive signals only apply when it comes to a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. What exactly could they see positive in Trump's victory, if even given the news of the victory plans, there was nothing good for the Kremlin, just as there was nothing good for us? This is a kind of déjà vu with the situation that was in late 1979 when the Soviet Union started the war in Afghanistan, or rather in 1980. At the time, the current administration of President Carter was definitely criticizing the Soviet Union, and there was a clear position that this was bad. The Kremlin believed that another candidate should win, a former actor named Reagan, and let him win, and everything would be great.
І тоді в Кремлі вважали, що так, треба, щоб переміг інший кандидат, ось там є якийсь колишній актор Рейган, ось хай він переможе і буде все супер. І перемога...
Reagan's victory was greeted with optimism in the Soviet Union, as it was believed that it would be easier to negotiate with this man. As history has shown, Reagan did a lot during his 2 terms, in 8 years, to make the Soviet Union cease to exist. Formally, the Soviet Union collapsed under Reagan's successor, Bush, but it is clear that it was Reagan who brought the Soviet Union to its final point. Now, the situation is similar with Russia. Russia, in fact, was not so much hoping for Trump as it was hoping that there would be unrest in the United States, which would focus attention in the country on them, and the United States would no longer think about Ukraine. However, although Trump won, there were no scandals, no civil unrest, and so on. It turns out that the U.S. government is being formed without a revolution, which Russia was waiting for. Despite functioning institutions, the desire for revolution may explain why they supported Trump in 2016. We recall the champagne in the State Duma after his win, but it ended with new U.S. sanctions on Russia. Trump's special representative, Kurt Volker, visited Ukraine, managed the situation and arranged weapon supplies, something not done during the Obama administration. This is to say that Russia hopes that things will get better now, but I don't think they will, because America has its own interests. And for Trump, establishing relations with America will mean that Putin will promise him to be Xi Jinping's enemy. How Xi Jinping will react to this remains to be seen, but something tells me that Putin will not take a stand against China for the sake of America. This may not be the best situation for him, because the Trump administration may be much more decisive in its actions. And the plans outlined by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo may come true. Although neither Pompeo nor Nikki Haley is rumored to be in the new administration, there is still time until January 20th, so we'll see if one of them will find a place.
Адміністрація Трампа може бути значно більш рішучою у своїх діях. І, скажімо так, ті плани, які мальовував колишній державний секретар Майк Помпео, вони можуть справдитись, попри те, що з чуток, які ми чуємо, що...
The emergence of people with a similar mindset to Pompeo and Haley's will certainly contribute to not only stopping, but perhaps even increasing aid to Ukraine.
Знайде своє місце, і поява людей подібного мислення, маю на увазі Помпео і Нікі Хейлі, вона безумовно буде сприяти не те, що припинення, а взагалі, можливо, навіть збільшення допомоги Україні, про що, до речі, сам Майк Помпео і неодноразово казав.
До речі, про це Reuters написали про те, що Гейлі і
Mike Pompeo has repeatedly stated this. Reuters reported that Haley and Pompeo won't be part of the new Trump administration. But given their support for Ukraine, what can we expect? Two individuals who have spoken positively about Ukraine or taken positive actions are reportedly not in the new administration. Let's wait until January 20th to see if Pompeo and Haley are included in Trump's administration. They are representatives of the neo-Reaganist wing of the Republican Party. Now, with the GOP holding majorities in both the Senate and the House, Trump needs to balance the MAGA group with neo-Reaganists like Nikki Haley to ensure effective governance.
Крила республіканської партії, а зараз Трампу, оскільки республіканська партія здобула більшість і в Сенаті, і в Палаті представників, бажано, щоб все ж таки ця більшість працювала і для забезпечення гарної
At least Nikki was his main opponent in the internal party primaries when he defeated her and became the Republican nominee. But again, for this balance to be achieved, we need to find a place for people who are the spokespersons for this wing. So it's worth waiting.
Саме Нікі була його основним опонентом на внутрішньопартійних праймеріс виборах, коли він і переміг і став номінантом від республіканської партії. Але, повторюсь, для того, щоб цей баланс був...
Despite the fact that Reuters said that they would not be part of the new administration, you know, there is a big vacuum of information now after Trump's victory. When something is being decided, but there is no decision, many people and politicians try to fill this vacuum with their messages. But the fact that they are doing this does not mean that Trump and his entourage will accept this information. We've already had a situation with a person who was related to Trump's company and said that Ukraine could forget about Crimea. But what happened? Immediately, Trump's entourage denied this idea. That is an interesting point. Despite the lack of clarity, they immediately said, no, we don't think so. And if someone thinks that Ukraine can forget about Crimea, this is not true. So let's see how the policy will be shaped further. Who will determine U.S. policy, and what views these people will have. Will there be people like Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo who are focused on helping Ukraine and whose philosophy is consistent with this assistance continuing? These are indeed new realities, and perhaps on the one hand this is a risk for Ukraine, certainly on the other hand, it is possible that the restrictions that existed, for example, on the use of weapons on Russian territory may be lifted. As former Speaker of the House Mike Johnson used to say, we shouldn't micromanage our assistance to Ukraine, implying that when America provides weapons to Ukraine and says, you don't do this, it's not a good thing. Because ultimately these weapons have to work. And if America's provided these weapons, then there is no need to say, don't hit here.
Наданні допомоги Україні, натякаючи на те, що коли Америка надає Україні озброєння і каже, що ви це не робіть,
if they believe they can provide it, they must trust the country receiving the weapons. For now, the only certainty is that something will change, but in which direction, only time will tell. Speaking of these parties, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that in the near future, we can expect important declarations on the ceasefire in Ukraine, on the borders along which it will operate, and on security guarantees for the state. What do you think we should expect? And could it be similar to the plan that the Wall Street Journal wrote about?
По якому воно діятиме, і гарантій безпеки для держави. Як вважаєте, чого очікувати, і чи може це бути схоже?
We are talking about a demilitarized zone, the so-called buffer zone, of 1,200 kilometers, which will be guarded by the British, French, Poles, and other Europeans, but not by the Americans. And we are talking about a moratorium on Ukraine's accession to NATO for more than 20 years, as well as a lot of weapons for Ukraine to defend itself against Russian aggression in the future. Let's wait and see. Since the position hasn't been formed yet, there is a vacuum filled by potential components, such as European troops. This isn't Trump's idea, but as Macron mentioned, French and other forces could be involved in Ukraine. Regarding Ukraine and NATO, we can recall an article by former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson from a few months ago.
Цілком можливо, що цей сценарій буде реалізовано. Що стосується України і НАТО, то тут можемо згадати статтю Бориса Джонсона, колишнього прем'єр-міністра.
Boris Johnson wrote that if Trump becomes president, he may want to withdraw U.S. troops from Europe, but they'd need replacing. He suggested Ukrainian troops could fill this role, given their combat experience, though they would need to be equipped with advanced weapons. This would allow the U.S. to save on military costs in Europe, passing the responsibility to Ukraine. Ukraine's NATO membership is still up for discussion, as these proposals align with Trump's pre-election ideology. I'm not sure a moratorium will happen, though talks will continue. As for the demilitarized zone, it's being discussed, but we'll have to see how it unfolds.
Під його бачення, яке існувало до виборів. Тому щодо мораторію подивимось. Я не впевнений, що він буде, хоча певні дискусії, безумовно, триватимуть. Щодо демілітаризованої зони,
After all, the demilitarized zone, at least in the context of the idea that each country remains in the territory where it is already present, means that Ukraine remains in the Kursk region. Let's not forget that we are there too. I understand that the Russians are making great efforts to push us out of there, but we have been present there for more than 3 months. So we'll see how it goes. And again, nothing is known yet. The plans are still being developed. And since they are still being developed, it means that we need to make efforts to adjust them in the right direction for us. Absolutely. By the way, with regard to all these plans, the French foreign minister believes that Trump is too wise to leave Ukraine because it would be the biggest territorial challenge or even annexation in the last 75 years. And Poland, by the way, has also stated that it is not in its interest to see Ukraine lose. In this context, are they considering more intensive military support or more active calls for a peaceful resolution of the situation? Of course, Trump, since he came in, will start by calling for peace, like any politician. Another question is, what if they explain it to him that peace is impossible. And if it is explained to him that there is a kind of modern axis of evil that is primarily against America, which is why we were so interested in Nikki Haley, because she formed the philosophy of the view, at least I heard it from her, that listen to what the enemies of Ukraine say. Let's deal with Ukraine, then with America. Then what the enemies of Israel say. Let's deal with Israel, then with America. To prevent threats to the U.S., we need to help Ukraine and other allies confront their enemies. If Russia is included, some joke that Russia prefers Trump, while Iran favors Kamala Harris, as they expect more problems from Trump, given his tough policies, like those towards Soleimani.
Щоб була Камала Харріс, тому що від Трампа з більшою ймовірністю Іран очікує проблем. Всі пам'ятають Сулеймані і доволі жорстку політику часів Трампа.
And the main thing here is to explain to Trump that, listen, you cannot have tough relations with Iran and good relations with Russia because they are one and the same. Either you make peace with all of them, or you fight them. And the main thing is to make sure that these countries, as Nikki Haley said, Russia and Iran, are seeking to destroy the United States. Therefore, we need to help the enemies of these countries win, as they say, and thus secure the United States of America. So again, while the vision is being formed, let's keep our fingers crossed that this philosophy will win over other, say, more destructive options for Ukraine. Putin recently ratified a treaty on bilateral cooperation with North Korea, agreeing to exchange military personnel if their countries face threats. They're already implementing parts of this agreement. A similar deal with Iran has been signed, but not ratified. There is already information I heard somewhere that 30,000 and some say 50,000 North Korean troops are present in Russia. Of course, this creates additional problems for Ukraine. But in my opinion, the opportunities that this alliance opens up for Ukraine are much greater. Why? Because the de facto alliance between Russia and North Korea makes South Korea and Japan North Korea's adversaries. And Ukraine's allies. And not just allies who will verbally support it, but allies who will actually want to help Ukraine win. In South Korea, it is very clearly understood that this alliance is now working against Ukraine, and then it will work against South Korea. That is, if South Korea goes to Russia's aid, it will be in exchange for Russia helping it resolve its issues with South Korea. Therefore, for South Korea, it is clear that if we stop both North Korea and Russia in Ukraine, if we do not allow them to win, then the issue of war on the Korean peninsula will disappear by itself, because there will be no one to wage that war from the north. As for Japan, there are also standard concerns about North Korea. We all remember the missile launches from North Korea toward Japan. Just a week or two ago, another missile landed 300 kilometers from Japan's territorial waters. That is, these constant missile launches irritate Japan, and so I do not exclude that the deepening of Russia's relations with North Korea will lead to Japan and South Korea to repeat, increasing their assistance to us. As for South Korea, this will include military equipment and perhaps even military personnel. I do not rule out this option. Japan will provide economic assistance, which will help determine if Ukraine can survive the next year financially. I think Japan will do a lot to help us pass it. Because for Japan, Ukraine's victory in the war against Russia will mean that a window of opportunity opens for them to return their northern territories, which Russia calls the Kurilas, to their country. Japan believes Russia's defeat will force it to seek peace, with the return of the Kuril Islands and possible denuclearization as conditions. While Russia-North Korea cooperation is a military concern, geopolitically, it benefits Ukraine.
знову ж таки, ця співпраця Росії і Північної Кореї, це безумовно проблема для наших військових, але геополітично для нас це радше плюс ніж мінус.
To conclude our conversation, as you know, after the massive Russian attack on Ukraine, 2 drones were found in northern Moldova yesterday. Not so long ago, by the way, it was the second case in a day. The Moldovan foreign minister condemned the violation of the country's airspace and said that it put the lives of Moldovan citizens in jeopardy. But will there be a reaction to this, and what should it be? After all, this is a real threat to the lives of citizens of another country. Moldova lacks significant capabilities, so there will be statements. But under the previous administration, NATO countries were discouraged from intervening in the war. I saw a video where Romanian border guards tried to shoot down a drone flying over Odessa, unsure if it would cross into Romania.
Безпілотники, хоча особисто бачив відео, яке мені показував колишній голова безпекового комітету парламенту Румунії, як румунські прикордонники роблять спроби збити шахеди, які летять.
The only thing was that they were asked not to talk about it, because as I understand it, that was the policy.
Єдине, що їх прохали про це не казати, бо я так розумію, така була політика. Зараз
Given the situation, I don't rule out that our neighbors may be allowed to directly shoot down threats in their airspace. If incidents like the one with Moldova increase, there may be no ban on tougher responses, including shooting down drones and possibly providing direct military assistance to Ukraine, including personnel.
Не виключатимуть не просто збиття цих дронів, а також, можливо, якоїсь безпосередньо підвищеної військової.
I mean, if earlier, I repeat, I had a feeling that such scenarios were forbidden, now I don't have this feeling anymore. So let's see what happens next.
Подібні сценарії заборонено, зараз в мене нема цього відчуття, тому подивимося, що воно буде.
Okay, Ivan, thank you very much for the conversation. Thank you for joining us. Ivan Us, Chief Consultant of the National Institute for Strategic Studies, was in touch with us.